Hello again, and welcome back to The Honest Truth with Mr. Spann. In the previous videos in this series, we've gone over the motivations of two of the biggest proponents of this Freemasonry, hip-hop, and devil worship trend. We've examined just a few of their falsehoods and their efforts to be prophets for profit. We've gone to the Holy Bible to address many of the contentions that some Christians have about Freemasonry. Now, we're about to examine briefly the history of where the accusations of Freemasons worshiping the devil comes from. So let's get right into this. No discussion about Freemasonry and the allegations of devil worship would be complete without the mention of Albert Pike. Plenty of people who are against Freemasonry like to point out passages of his book, Morals and Dogma, as proof that Freemasons indeed worship the devil. They give him titles such as the Pope of Freemasonry, while others tend to call him the most influential man Freemasonry has known. Some have gone so far as to say that his book, Morals and Dogma, is required reading for a Freemason, and that this book is a rule and guide on the true doctrine of Freemasonry. But was Albert Pike everything they say he was? Does his book, Morals and Dogma, provide proof that Masons are worshiping the devil? Let's examine, shall we? First, let's look at the amount of authority Albert Pike had during his time as Sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite's Southern Jurisdiction. Pike served in this capacity from 1859 until his death in 1891. This is what the United States looked like in 1859. The Southern Jurisdiction at the time of Pike consisted of Missouri, Tennessee, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas. So not only was his authority limited to these states, but his authority only extended to those who chose to pursue degrees in the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry in those states. Albert Pike had no authority at all to those who would pursue the York Rite in their Masonic progression. Even those Masons in the very states I mentioned, because they were of a different rite. And let's not forget the Freemasons in other parts of the world at the time who had no clue who Albert Pike was because they had never heard of him. Although Brother Pike was very accomplished in his Masonic career, he was not the Pope of Freemasonry in any capacity, and not as influential as so many people of anti-Masonic thought would have you believe. Not only was he not as influential as some would have you believe, but to someone who has actually read the book, it becomes blatantly obvious that they are only quoting passages out of context, and some simply haven't read the book at all. Here's one of the passages most anti-Masons like to throw around. The blue degrees are but the outer court or portico of the temple. Part of the symbols are displayed there to the initiate, but he is intentionally misled by false interpretations. It is not intended that he shall understand them, but it is intended that he shall imagine that he understands them. Their true explication is reserved for the adepts, the princes of Masonry. People of anti-Masonic thought use this passage to advance their narrative that third-degree Masons don't know what they are a part of. Another passage of the book that they like to point to as proof that Lucifer is somehow the god of Freemasonry says this: Lucifer, the light bearer. Strange and mysterious names to give to the spirit of darkness. Lucifer, the son of the morning. Is it he who bears the light, and with its splendors intolerable, blinds feeble, sensual, or selfish souls? Doubt it not. These passages are the smoking guns, right? Not in the least. And again, this is why it's important to do your own research. Lucifer is not the god of Freemasonry, as we have already established that it is not a religion. Let's quote Pike in Morals and Dogma on page 161. Masonry is not a religion. He who makes of it a religious belief falsifies and denaturalizes it. But not only that, probably the most important part of the voluminous work that is Morals and Dogma is right at the beginning of the book in its preface, as it says, Everyone is free to reject and dissent from whatsoever herein may seem to him to be untrue or unsound. It is only required of him that he shall weigh what is taught and give it a fair hearing and unprejudiced judgment. Why would a book that is supposed to be the required reading to all Freemasons and is supposedly the documented doctrine of the fraternity tell its readers that they don't have to believe anything in the book at all? Does the Holy Bible, Quran, Torah, Bhagavad Gita, or any other religious doctrine or scripture come with a disclaimer? Morals and Dogma was a philosophical work of one of the brothers of Freemasonry. It has never been the Morals and Dogma of Freemasonry, and Brother Pike has never been the Pope or leader of Freemasonry. This is Gabriel Antoine Jogan Paget, known to most of the world as Leo Taxil. This man pulled off one of the biggest hoaxes in history, a hoax so complete that even 123 years after he admitted to the hoax, people still cite his writings and works as proof that Freemasonry is a satanic, bafflement-worshipping cult. Some people repeat passages of Taxil and don't even know where the passages came from. How many of you have heard of this quote by Albert Pike? That which we must say to a crowd: we worship a God, but it is the God that one adores without superstition. To you, sovereign grand inspectors general, we say this, that you may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees. The Masonic religion should be, by all of its initiates of the high degrees, maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, whose deeds prove his cruelty, perfidy, and hatred of man, barbarism, and repulsion for science, would Adonai and his priests calumniate him? Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately Adonai is also God. For the eternal law is that there is no light without shade, no beauty without ugliness, no white without black. For the absolute can only exist as two gods, darkness being necessary to the statute and the brake to the locomotive. Thus, the doctrine of Satanism is a heresy, and the true and pure philosophical religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil. Now, that would be pretty compelling evidence that the Freemasons at the higher degrees are practicing devil worship, and Pike was the grand facilitator of instituting that doctrine, wouldn't it? It would be if that were actually the words of Pike, but they are not. This quote was written by none other than Leo Taxil. The quote was originally printed by the French publication La Femme et l'Enfant la Franc-Maçonnerie Universelle. I hope I didn't butcher that up. By A.C. Delarive in 1894. But after Taxil publicly admitted to his hoax, that same publication published this in 1897. With frightening cynicism, the miserable person we shall not name here declared before an assembly especially convened for him that for 12 years he had prepared and carried out to the end the most sacrilegious of hoaxes. We have always been careful to publish special articles concerning Palladianism and Diana Vaughan. We are now giving in this issue a complete list of these articles, which can now be considered as not having existed. The full text of the Taxil Confession will be provided in the video notes. But what was Taxil's motivation for coming up with such an elaborate hoax? The reason most commonly known by those who studied it is that Taxil was disillusioned by the Catholic Church and their stance on Freemasonry. So as a way to make the church look foolish, he created the hoax to point out how easily its members would perpetuate the supposed evils of Freemasonry. The result was a widely held belief and still falsely repeated assertion that Freemasons worship the devil. With this series, we have only scratched the surface of many of the people and ideas mentioned when discussing this phenomenon. The point of the Honest Truth series was to get you to see that there are always at least two sides to a story. I have implored every viewer to do their own research and study these things for themselves. I will never tell anyone who doesn't agree with this series that they just want to be blind. I'll leave it to you to come to your own conclusions. And as I've said to you many times before, you don't have to take my word for it. As we come to the end, or towards the end of this series, the 6th installment will be my commentary on this whole phenomenon, and I'll address some of the detractors to this series. So, come back and watch the conclusion of The Honest Truth. I look forward to hearing from you and reading your responses. Thank you again for watching Spann TV. Peace.